It comes back to managing inputs, managing outputs. I think talk to any BD professional in the industry, that's the constant balance being. And if you're not where you should be or where you need to be, recalibrate.
Today on Deal Sorcery, we're joined by Jonathan Babcock from Compass Group Equity Partners. Recently named one of the BD professionals to watch for 2025, Jonathan breaks down Compass's thesis-driven sourcing playbook, featuring a 30-point scorecard and an emphasis on long-term relationship building. Thanks for tuning in. This is Deal Sorcery.
All right, guys, welcome to the show. We've got Jonathan Babcock. Jonathan, welcome to the show. How are you, my man?
Levin, appreciate you guys having me on. Really excited to be here. Fiance is tired of hearing all my snippets on private equity business development, and so I'm glad I found two guys that enjoy it, just as much as I do, and enjoy talking about it. So
we'll take all your snippets here, my man. We love it. Well, glad to hear it. Glad to have you. Hey, also, congrats on being named one of the top business development professionals to watch in 2025, man. How were you picked? How did that happen? How'd that come about?
really, they asked for recommendations, and I think had a number of people reach out, say they threw my name in that ring and didn't think anything would come of it. But I think it's a byproduct of one being on a great team where being successful is easy. It's not always seamless, but it's a lot easier with the great team that we've got. And I think I found, that role that I truly enjoy. Just love getting out, building relationships, making connections, connect with about, 700 people every year. Every conversation gets logged into a cloud. And I think it's a byproduct of just doing what you love.
So you got to be doing the media roadshow now, right? Are you just having calls left and right to pop on shows,
A little bit. I've done, I think, a few podcasts. David Toll was nice enough to bring me on. But, try and focus on finding deals, really. At the end of the day, that's go to bed at night thinking about proprietary deals and drumming them up. So you can't try and do every podcast. It's good to get the name out there. But when you guys reached out, wanted to take the time, love what you guys do. And I think it's a good community for the market.
Deal Sorcery community, man. Yeah, no, we're glad to have you, buddy. Really, really appreciate it. So look, I know we want to spend a lot of time today talking about thesis development, right? And thematic investing, what goes into that, how you bring to market, all that sort of stuff. But before we do that, let's set the stage for a minute. So you're out here, right? Boots on the ground. Just tell me, what's it like right now out there in the market?
I would say competitive, to say the least, and you have to have an angle, right? And it's got to be ingrained in the culture to, do things in a differentiated way. I think the common thread here is really monitoring your key inputs and, monitoring your key outputs. And what that does is a scale of, if your key outputs aren't where they need to be or aren't where they should be, you got to go back and look at your inputs and make sure those are in line with where you're focused and where you're competing. And it goes back to really your investment criteria. We're focused on lower middle market. So family founder-led businesses, call it 2 to 15 of EBITDA. Generally doing a lot of proprietary outreach, trying to develop relationships over the course of sometimes 2 years, sometimes 5 years. You got to do differentiated task and differentiated approach to find those opportunities and go where other people aren't going, right? And so what is that? I think city trips, Dan hits on a lot, but happen to be places. I met with an owner 2 weeks ago in the industrial services space, call it more broadly, that said, hey, planning a trip in X city, met with the owner and, second generation and great conversation. It's one of those longer opportunities, stay in touch base in 6 months, but wouldn't have come if you're not doing those trips. If you've got a list of 10 companies that you think are exciting, shoot them a note, see if you get something back. If not, no harm, no foul, right? And then industry specific conferences. So common theme to a lot of groups, you get out to industry conferences, but I think instead of the mentality of just using it to learn about the industry, if you're not setting meetings before the industry conference, you're going to be stuck just walking tables, collecting pamphlets. You really have to be aggressive, maybe not the right word, but have a strategy for how you're going to set meetings with owners before you get there, and talk to your upmarket bankers, right? A lot of those groups will know their vertical expertise, what industry conferences to go to. And, we went to a Power Grid conference here recently. There were 6 bankers there, and usually that's a sign of, business owners soon to follow. And so that's another thing I think groups have to focus on. Developing deep relationships. I call this the recurring revenue stream, right? Set it and forget it. You can build deep relationships with your tier 1s, tier 2s. If you think there's a lot of good overlap, not just in the near term, but long term, especially, set it and forget it. Set a calendar invite every 3 months. You can do it on an Outlook where it's perpetual. It doesn't cancel, right? And you can always cancel a quarterly update. Say there's not much here, but do probably 100 of those right now. And then I think the last one is, again, more difficult, long tail path, but center of influences, right? Who are your wealth managers in a city or market that you like? Know those wealth managers, law firms, accounting firms. Know those relationships. Know who's meaningfully enough connected to make those introductions, and have an emphasis on staying in touch. Again, longer tail, but definitely worth the while. And then lastly, I think Alyssa Wood from KKR was recently quoted, get out of the office, right? Same thing with the city trips, industry conferences. You're not building relationships to the extent you should be if you're sitting behind your desk. I think video conference calls, especially coming out of the pandemic, immensely beneficial. Again, probably do 500 of those a year. Relationships that some people I've never met in person, but I know they've got 3 kids and what hobby they enjoy and all the personal details after you've been catching up for each quarter. But get in person, get in the office. That's where you find those one-off fireside chat opportunities, or even meeting with owners. And so I think those are key themes, especially in this market. But again, it comes back to managing inputs, managing outputs. I think talk to any BD professional in the industry, that's the constant balance beam. And if you're not where you should be or where you need to be, recalibrate, rethink some things, especially in this slow market. You need to do it, I think, anyways.
A master's thesis in deal sourcing right here. So it's not just, let me hit the summary here, just make sure I got them right, which is like, be thematic, right? Get on the road, diversify your sources, measure inputs and outputs, and then focus on long-term human-to-human relationship building. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, you nailed it.
Jonathan, that was awesome framework on your view on the best practices for BD professionals today, given it's such a competitive market. I think a key thing there is also the number of players in the market, right? If you look at that as kind of like an outline on what you should do or what the best firms should do, are you seeing other firms implement the same strategies? Like, are you, bumping shoulders more often with firms out there who are getting out on the road? Or do you think that this is still kind of like a true differentiator?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a true differentiator. I think more groups are starting to talk about it. Talked to Dan a few weeks ago about just one data point, but talked to an investment banker that got a close relationship with. And he said 90% of groups say they're thesis driven. I think that deeply thematic approach, which it's not just a one pager even, I think the term in VC is no deck, no meeting. If you don't have a deep insight into an industry, I think it's tough. And if you're not a patient, long-term view on that industry, I think it's a difficult environment.
You mentioned kind of building a really deep thesis, right? I think a little bit of that was saying, a lot of people say they're thesis driven or thematic, but like they don't actually know the theme or the thesis. Maybe they do a sprint in it, but like what does that really mean? Can you walk us through how you go from an idea or something you found in a sim to like a full-fledged thesis? Like how does that work to you?
We treat it almost like a board, right? Where quarterly we have thesis updates. New thesis, you go through the framework of there's an ideation thesis scorecard, right? And so 10 key questions that gets ranked, each one 0 to 3, best score out of 30, right? And so if you come to the thesis meeting for the first time, you're 20 out of 30, you better have a darn good reason of why you're bringing this in front of the group. Usually it's 25 to 30, but some of those key themes within that ideation thesis scorecard, it's what's the barbell of the industry look like? Who are the key players at the top? How much consolidation has occurred? One of the key questions are, what inning are we in, right? And so try and find those industries that are earlier innings from a PE activity standpoint. And then basic things like CAGR, what's the growth of the industry, sizable industry, what's the total addressable market, not just for the overarching theme, but dialing back and looking at it. And so that first stage is really called for us establishing a theme. That's when you present out that first scorecard and put it together. PowerPoint, great tool of putting your thoughts on paper. And that's when you present out to the different group.
I'm curious, is this thesis development, all the things that you talked about, is that part of your workflow as a business development professional? I understand it's a firm culture to kind of be always thinking about investment themes, but given all the different things we talked about, being on the road and relationship building and all the effort that goes into that, are you the busiest guy in BD?
Definitely busy, but any given time we've got, maybe 10 theses in the works. And, that first bucket mentioned is establishing a theme. We've got 2 more buckets, validate and refine, before moving to active. And so every associate, like I mentioned, is coming in tasked with identifying a thesis area, working with a VP director level to promote that thesis, move it forward. And so we've got a thesis development scorecard. How are you moving that forward in the refine and validating bucket? First step, get firm-wide buy-in. Once you do that, establishing a recurring internal meeting is crucial to building momentum and keeping that going. Before we partnered with Hoist and Crane Service Group, we called ourselves the Crane Train. You've got to come up with a unique thesis name. We had whistles, and every Friday afternoon we'd meet on Pipeline, and how many proprietary conversations we had moving forward. And it made it fun. I think John Hune, our founding partner, he's done a good job of saying, don't just find an industry that, somebody passed off to you. Find an industry you're genuinely curious to learn more about, finding that area that you're really excited about. And then so as you're moving that thesis forward with those recurring internal meetings, set the meeting, that's when you get the updates. Establish an internal thesis deck. It's outbound. Take some of those thesis development slides, put it in a digestible format for an owner, for bankers. Like I said, it's getting more competitive on some of these opportunities where not just over a call, but establishing rapport through that thesis deck and have it external facing is critical. It's not just a one pager, it's 15 slides of why we think this space is interesting and why you should choose us.
So it sounds like the playbook overall for a good theme, right, is like come up with an idea and probably start with something that you're genuinely curious about, and then really just like validate and score it with metrics, right? Is that the right way to think about it?
Exactly. The phrase for us is don't confuse activity with productivity, but metrics play a key role in identifying what stage you're at. Is it moving forward? First, ideation, thesis scorecard, right? That's stage 1. Stage 2 is the development scorecard. 9 different things. You've either done it or you haven't. So 0 out of 9, you get ranked on that. And then moving forward, once you've validated and refined your thesis, understanding where valuation trends are at. Every call gets logged into Deal Cloud, our internal operating system for all things thesis development and business development. Hand in hand, right? Relationships are key. Great outcomes come from great relationships. But early in my career wasn't as friendly to the CRM. And now I'm like, if you didn't log it, it didn't happen, right? You got to get it in there. We're tracking valuation trends and really all the key information you need to drive a thesis forward in Deal Cloud, and moving that forward helps assimilate, all the information that we've taken in.
So there's kind of one deck, right? And that deck has the scorecard, like how this has been validated, right? And then all the subsequent information. And then you kind of meet on that on a quarterly basis to walk through that, be aligned on, are we still underwriting this thesis or not? And then like, what's the strategy for this thesis overall? And if there's any tweaks to that, is that the right way to think about it?
Exactly. And really after that first buy-in, again, continuing the momentum after you get the buy-in is not just waiting for the next quarterly update, just like board meetings. Sometimes people touch base in the interim, more hands-on approach. You're working on that thesis, thinking about it every single day.
Got it. Okay. So you have a new investment theme, you have a new thesis, you have that master deck document to work off of. how do you take that and utilize it from a BD standpoint? And what are the key pieces of that document that you really hone in on?
Really, everything lives and breathes in Deal Cloud. Again, that's our operating system. And so we've got different tabs within each thesis, and then we've got an overarching thesis dashboard that outlines where everybody's at on the scorecard, what stage they're at. But once we get that document established, we're creating, I think the first step is what's the intermediary universe? That's one leg of the stool, create that intermediary universe of everybody that's touching the space. And within that, you've got not just investment banks, you've got upmarket groups that are working on more sponsor backed activities, building deep relationships with them from the onset of a thesis, even in the establishing theme phase. They've got good insights of what platform strategies other groups have used, what worked, what didn't work. Gotten several, thesis executive introductions. Again, a key thing to propelling a thesis forward. Every boutique investment bank, those are usually the groups we're really competing on, right? Those limited process relationship wins. So groups that are 2 to 10, total deal makers on the team. And usually there's not as much vertical expertise. You never know what opportunities coming in the door next. But if you've done a deal in the space, we want to talk to you. We want to learn from that process. And so that's a key part. Finding those key vertical expertise investment banks are really a critical component of that. But then, what's the other universe of that? So again, center of influences, there's groups that specialize in certain vertical expertise, getting insights from what worked, what didn't work from accounting firms or even law firms, wealth managers, anybody touching the space, we want to have a conversation. And then moving forward, it's how do we go out and find that thesis executive and spend too much time on LinkedIn to my fiance's demise. But oddly enough, through prior roles in sponsor coverage, connected to a lot of PE firms, connected to probably 5,000 investment makers in space. Pretty quick pulse on the market. If you go out, start hunting around on LinkedIn, you can find those thesis executives and get quote unquote what I call hot signals of, hey, they are plugged in the industry. They're connected to so-and-so over at other PE firm here. They're probably worth talking to in the industry. Same with owners, right? Understanding who the owners are connected to, looking at their LinkedIns, if they're connected to a certain investment bank, you've got a market signal telling you that they might be engaged. Reach out to them. That's how we propel the thesis forward. And, that individual thesis dashboard. It's got things like valuation insights. We're trying to get those on those early calls. It's critical for a thesis to understand where do platforms trade at? What's 10 plus of EBITDA trade for? What's 20 plus of EBITDA? What does that trade for? And then add-ons. How attractive or how accretive can add-ons be?
I love it, dude. So you've mentioned a couple times this concept of centers of excellence or centers of expertise. Can you just quickly explain what does that mean?
Yeah, center of influence is really, wealth managers, accounting firms. For thesis-driven sourcing, sometimes it's tough. You got to find city markets where certain people are really plugged in. They're not might be that industry expert within the wealth management space. Have a buddy, he's carved out the vet space pretty well, but pretty rare to find. It's usually just center of influence. Anybody that's got a touch point with a business owner that's got a firm foundation, firm relationship.
Got it. So your point is like somebody in a market that's really well connected in that market. Is that right?
Exactly. And so when you do those city trips, it's reaching out to those individuals. St. Louis, like especially a lot of the markets we play in, small markets, tertiary markets, usually you're only 1 or 2 connections maybe away from getting in front of the person you're trying to get in front of. And so again, long tail, but the theme is build relationships, and it takes time to see what comes of that, but it's crucial to the process. But center of influence and then industry executive, kind of 2 separate buckets. Industry executives are more of those expert network calls. Usually on a thesis, we're trying to find 10 executives that could either be board members or work alongside them, get engaged, do weekly calls as soon as we have conviction in a thesis, and finding those people that understand the industry level at a very deep level is really crucial, and it builds credibility. I think the common theme here is how do you build credibility with an owner they're in a small town, they've got 150 employees that are like family to them. They put food on the table for them. One owner I talked to, he said, how did an employee come up? And it was an awesome opportunity. They said they sent 3 of their kids to college, through working there. They bought a truck they never thought they could buy, bought a house. And so there's a big responsibility as an owner. And so there's a lot of people reaching out. That credibility piece is crucial. They hear PE, the big bad wolf, from some Wall Street Journal articles, but that credibility of not just on a thesis level, but culturally, I think we say people first, people oriented. Not every last dollar matters. It's about the people in the business that help that owner get to where they're at today, and conveying that you're going to preserve that legacy is equally as crucial as the thesis development part. But if you don't do the thesis development, you're not cracking in the door and having that conversation.
I think a lot of people forget, right, that people do deals with people they like.
100%. People enjoy connecting. I think it's back to that. You got to have a personality. I call it leave the suit at the office. If you're going out to visit these owners, connect with them. I think it's hard for some people. One process here recently, debriefed with the banker, and they sent in their founder for the management meeting, and he spent 2.5 hours talking about himself and all their successes. And they were the lead horse coming into that process. They were supposed to win if that went well. And obviously it didn't. The owners pulled the banker aside and said, not a chance do we go with them. And so I think it's a common thing that seems so obvious, but is oftentimes, forgot about. Do a lot of cold calls where the first 10 seconds are crucial, and you've got 10 seconds to show why you're reaching out, building credibility. But the most important part of that, I've realized, you don't spew out a bunch of industry knowledge you think you have. You try and build a relationship, do some research ahead of time. Found out one guy was on a nonprofit board that I saw had a mutual connection, made the connection over the phone, and ended up talking to him for 45 minutes. And so you got to do those obvious things, but I think it's often forgot about in this industry.
So speaking about relationship building, like you mentioned, okay, these centers of influence, right? Like people in a market and that are well connected in that market, right? And have influence in that market. How do you find that person?
Long tail, building relationships. You quickly identify in those markets who those key people are. You learn a market and understand, you quickly connect the dots on, hey, whose name comes up every time we ask, who else should we be connecting with? And usually it's 3 or 4 individuals that are, the BD people or the relationship people where they know almost everybody. We've got a few of those here in St. Louis where investment banks come into town. I say, hey, connect with so-and-so, or find a way to grab coffee with so-and-so. Those are the key relationships we're looking for. Through this, I think I've got a favorite book called The Innovation Stack, right? It's not about one thing that you do well. It's how you stack all the different things that really make you differentiated in the market. And that in lies really your moat or barrier to entry, almost like any other business model, right? How do you do all these things right? Find industry executives effectively. How do you cultivate center of influences? How do you establish deep relationships, not just ones with investment banks where you're finding out about the deal when the teaser comes out? You want to find out about it as soon as they pitch it. So doing all those different things is really, I think, how you build a moat in this space.
Clearly, the investment banking community, the intermediary community is really important, but I know that you guys are also opportunistic with proprietary outreach, or you also will spend time trying to get conversations with businesses directly. Tell us more about that outreach, what that looks like. I'm also curious, how do you determine, okay, we should spend some time doing some direct outreach in this market or for this thesis? What goes into that decision?
Those are the stage gates, right? As you have proven you've established a theme, you get the buy-in from the quarterly meeting. You go out, you validate the market. Are these things true? Go for no. Really understanding. I think the key theme is establishing a standardized set of questions per thesis. Continuously ask them almost meticulously where, yeah, we've asked it 50 times already, but does it check out to be true? And those are your data points. Moving forward into refining, now that you know the industry is attractive, you've got good tailwinds, not many external risk factors. Go out, refine, drill down. John Hune, our founding partner, he does a good job of this, but drilling down below the surface, right? Once you've hit that refine, validated the market, dug deep, found the exact, sum it up in 2 sentences, this is what we're looking for, that's when we move to that proactive outreach. And I think this is a key theme as well, maybe hit on it a little bit earlier, but I think there's some groups it's more reactive, waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for teasers to come in, versus leaned in, really excited about the thesis, thinking about it every single day, being proactive in outreach. And that's really when you build the target list. Once you've hit it, that validate, refine bucket, establishing not hundreds, it's 40, 50 platform size opportunities, potential targets that put together that list using Grata largely, but then also Apollo IO, Seamless AI, other data scraping tools, vetting out, have we found everybody? But you don't have to have everybody to get started. You got to jump in the water. You got to start making connections. You never know if that owner is going to sign somebody up and be taken to market. And so starting outreach as soon as you hit that, really establish a theme, refine, validate bucket. And then we hit go and we reach out. And so 40, 50 targets is really the starting point, and understanding basic things like how many LinkedIn employees, right? In these industrial services businesses, niche manufacturing, not every employee is on LinkedIn, but you can establish how big is their back office. Do they have 40, 50, 60 employees on LinkedIn? Probably tells you, they're sizable enough, maybe as a platform. You never know, too, going to websites, pretty misleading. Some of the, maybe inconspicuous websites that look like they were made from the 80s, they just never updated it. They fly under the radar, and that's a $30 million in revenue business. But you got to start reaching out, building relationships. And so we've got a systematic 13-step outreach process. Read this research report that Microsoft put together about 13 touch points, right? Most people, different sales process, but similar themes. Most people give up after the fourth, outreach, but 13 unique touch points that are systematic. We can identify where we most likely to connect. And again, 80% of that is direct calls. And so from the onset of that 13-step process, it's conveying credibility, domain knowledge, the depth of all the research that we've done, showing them that it's worth taking 15 minutes out of their day to connect and have a conversation with us. So that's sending over, industry reports, research materials, really any intel that we can provide that owner to show, hey, we're spending time in the space, we're plugged in. Hey, we're going to this industry conference. It would be great to connect. Miss you at the industry conference, following up afterwards saying, hey, we'd still love to connect. And so unique touch points, I think, is the common theme. Recently connected with an owner that just engaged with their LinkedIn over the last 2 years, tried to stay top of mind, and they finally got back. And so you've got to hit every channel, even though I think direct calling is the main connection that we're breaking in with groups.
How do you measure success on that direct outreach? A recurring theme is kind of applying sales best practices to private equity deal sourcing. That comes up a lot, particularly with firms that are focused on proprietary sourcing. But it's not sales, and maybe isn't the best environment to make it a sales team. For you guys, how do you measure success top to bottom?
I think it goes back to those key inputs, right? Key inputs, target lists, key data points of how large some of these groups are, but then tracking key metrics like, have we submitted an offer in the last 3 months? How many detailed reviews? How many NDAs have we gotten executed? How many times have we received financials? How many times have we made it on site to a facility? Call it a field trip almost. I think, hoist and crane, we made it out to a number of facilities, and being able to speak on that level of knowledge once you've made it out to a facility, shaking hands, and propels things in a way that just over the phone doesn't do. And so building that trust. So those are all the key metrics that we're tracking to establish, hey, did we hit where we say we're going to hit? But I think key outputs is really the focus there. It's not just let's have as many conversations from the onset of a thesis. That's helpful. Every owner you talk to, you're going to help refine that thesis, learn how people talk in the industry a little bit more. But at the end of the day, we still want to find the right partnership. And some of the smaller groups I think are great. You can have 10 conversations with, maybe quote unquote more add-on size opportunities that if you stay in touch properly, you can warm up pretty quickly thereafter once you found the right partnership. But at the end of the day, we're excited to get in the industry. And so finding that platform size opportunity is a crucial part of the process.
We've hit a lot of good stuff here today, man. Tactics, strategies, how to do thematic investing, thesis building. If you were jumping into a new firm or in a firm kind of building out thesis-driven sourcing for the first time today, like how would you start? What would your playbook be?
Really, I'd be focused on long-term mindset approach to start, right? Not thinking you're going to establish a thesis, do the research, and 3 months later you've got that platform opportunity that nobody else has come across in a largely competitive market where you have groups 2, 3 times our fund size coming down to compete on 4, 5, 6, 7 of EBITDA. It's competitive. And so being patient, taking that long-term approach, and continuously monitoring your key inputs and key outputs, again, creating those stage gates of how a thesis moves forward and monitoring how many resources are getting allocated to that, I think is crucial as well. It's almost like a cruise ship, right? You set a direction, and after you've been going that direction, it's tough to turn around, right? And so setting from the onset those expectations, key parameters, key guardrails, I think it's deeply and culturally ingrained here at Compass, where every day people are thinking about their thesis development, how to move it forward, how to have more conversations. But if you're just now establishing a theme, taking a patient view, even might take 2, 3 years. And so being patient over the long term, I think, is the key theme for if you want to get started in investment thesis.
There you got it. Have it be a long-term strategic focus, right? And 2 is make it sure it's part of everybody's day-to-day practice. Is that right?
Exactly. Deeply ingrain it, make sure everybody's thinking about it every single day, but also make it fun. I think John Hune, Chris Gibson, our 2 managing partners, have done a good job of making sure it's this fun, exciting thing that people get to scratch that itch of endless curiosity. And I think if you're in this industry, you already have that. And so finding an industry that you somewhat like, it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes these industries are a little, quote unquote, less sexy. And that's sometimes where we're investing, but make it fun, make it exciting, and get out there, learn as much as you can. And I think that's truly what I enjoy about the role is every day you're picking up something new. Every day you're learning, especially when we're working on 10 different theses, trying to move them forward.
Jonathan Babcock, everybody. Thanks for joining today, buddy. It's been a great conversation having with you here. Hopefully telling everybody a little bit about how to do thesis-driven thematic investing, top to bottom. If you haven't yet, subscribe to Deal Sorcery here. We got more, great shows and conversations coming up every other week. Thanks again, Jonathan. Appreciate it, buddy.
I appreciate you guys having me on. Again, I could talk about this all day long, enjoy it. And so I appreciate you guys just taking some time to connect and have me on today.